07, Chapter 7. Done deal. After the holidays, I was eager to get back to LA. It was finally time to sign my contract. The only problem was that my parents wanted me to wait and retain a lawyer, but that would take more time, and I was ready to make everything official. Suge and his lawyers had already been asking for the contract, so I ended up forging my mother's name. I was a kid from Chicago with a $275 killing deal on the table. There was no way I was going to risk waiting on a lawyer. About a week after the contract was signed, the label gave Shorty a check for the total amount. This was standard business as he was responsible for getting me to LA. He had hired Pitbull, who had essentially got me the deal, so I expected that he would need to recoup expenses, plus a small percentage, but that wasn't how things went down. Suge's first wife, Sharitha, met us at Citizens Bank. After Shorty cashed the check, he got into the car with Sharitha and gave her $100,000 in cash. When we got back to the hotel, Shorty gave me 25K bass, and that was the last time I saw him. The same person who got me started on death row had taken my money and left me stranded. It took me some time to realize that I had been scammed. I was a teenager and 25K bass was still a lot of money, but when Shorty didn't return, I knew that I had been taken advantage of. It was difficult to process. As the artist, I received less than anyone involved. Shit, Suge wasn't even supposed to get paid out of that money. When Shorty took off with the advance, he also left me with the responsibility of taking care of the other guys that had come out with us. Fusky and some of the members of Crucial Conflict were still in LA. That $25K wasn't going to last long. It was a hard hit, but I had to get back to work. Plus my label was depending on me, and I needed to deliver. I went back in the studio with Quick and his production manager, G1. During those sessions, I had a chance to meet with musicians that were playing for so many big names in Hollywood. G1 had connections with them all because he had just returned from Brandy's I Wanna Be Down tour. Man, we were in that studio recording every day. Quick's samples were minimal because he mostly used live musicians. The music was incredible, it was organic. Those were some of my best sessions. I was high off the music alone, but like many times in my life, that high was short-lived. When I got home, there was a message on the machine about my mother. She had fallen ill. I was anxious to see her, but my grandmother told me that she was all right and that she just wanted to let me know she was back in the hospital. She told me to stay in LA and continue working. I couldn't agree until I actually heard my mother's voice. I quickly placed a call to the University of Chicago Hospital. When I called, my mom answered and we talked on the phone for a long time. She was just laughing in her soft voice. The laughs gave me hope that she would be okay. Suge called to check on me. He asked what hospital she was in, and the next thing I knew, he had filled her hospital room with flowers. Within a week, my mom was released. She returned home to my grandmother, who had just had surgery herself. Heart issues were common in my family, and it wasn't unusual for one or both of them to be sick. My mom would sit on the couch, and my grandmother would sit in her lazy boy chair. They would take care of each other. Each time I called to check on my mother, she would ask if Trina had given birth yet. Not yet, I'd tell her. I was excited to share the news that we were having a girl, and that I had been there for the ultrasound. But we would all have to wait to meet her. It would be another 4 months before our little princess would arrive. Even though I had signed a record deal and had a baby on the way, I was still a minor. Living apart from my parents created a legal problem. I needed a guardian who could be in the state of California with me. Because of her heart condition, my mother couldn't travel. My father was in his 60s and too settled in Chicago to pick up and move to California. I considered Trina, but I wasn't going to set myself up like that. If I gave her that kind of control over me, I would really have to come in the house when she said so. Oh hell no, I wasn't having that. When I went to Suge with my dilemma, he told me that he had talked to my mom in the hospital and promised her that he would take care of me. Suge said to me, "Danny boy, you always with me. I might as well adopt you, as long as you don't go all Hollywood on me." Once his lawyer drafted the documents, we had them signed, and I officially became a knight. Mid-January, I was in the lobby of the hotel waiting for Dave Foreman, who had been in on most of my sessions. I was sitting in the bar at the window when he arrived. When he came in, he had Darius McCrae with him. Darius was one of the stars of the television show Family Matters. He played Eddie Winslow. Darius was accompanied by his cousin who was working on music with him. Like so many others in the industry, we connected over music. We exchanged numbers and vowed to keep in touch. A few days later, Darius called me and told me that his cousin had died in his sleep. It was the same cousin that I had just met a couple of days earlier. Darius wanted to know if he could put me on the program. It was a familiar place for me. I was always singing at funerals. It was actually an honor to be asked. When I met Darius's mother and siblings, they were some of the nicest people. They treated me like they had known me for years and quickly became my extended family. The day of the funeral, I sang a solo, and Darius and I sung a duet. After the service, I had a chance to meet the rest of his family. They reminded me of my own family. They came together like we would when we experienced loss. They showed so much love and affection for one another. I could tell from their conversations that they saw each other all the time. It wasn't just funeral talk. They weren't in love with each other just because someone had died. After the funeral, I got back to recording my album. I was working with some great producers and things were looking good. Murder Was the Case had dropped and could not be kept on the store's shelves. It was the shit. People all over were hearing my voice. My dreams were coming true. I met MC Hammer and Keisha Cole during this time. Hammer brought her up to death row. She was trying to be an artist. She would hang around the label and travel with us from time to time. We bonded like siblings. I was the big brother. I even gave her vocal lessons at one time. Those were the good times. Before long, she too would grow up and show her ass. Chapter 8, Dear Mama, February 8, 1995. I had been in the studio working on the song All on Me with Kevin Lewis, son of jazz pianist Ramsey Lewis. Studio sessions were normally easy for me, but that night I kept getting hung up on one part. I just couldn't get it right. The part was so simple that the guys couldn't understand why I was having such difficulty. Something was off. Before I could give it much thought, Death Row's secretary came in with an urgent message. I rushed to the phone. On the other end was my grandmother. She told me that my mother had gone back into the hospital. You need to come home, she said. In the past, my grandmother had always told me to stay. Work, she would say. This time, she was calling on me to come home. She had confirmed what my spirit already knew. It was the reason I couldn't focus in the studio. My mother was on her deathbed. I immediately called my homie, Young Buck. He was my first friend in LA. If there was anyone I could count on, it was him. When he got there, things went from bad to worse. There was a terrible storm and a pending evacuation for the area. Just 2 blocks away, the streets had flooded and the traffic lights were underwater. Flights were delayed and I wouldn't be able to get out of LA until the next day. I couldn't sleep. I paced the floor all night, calling my grandmother periodically to pray. I was desperate to be by my mother's side. I could feel her leaving. That next afternoon, I called my grandmother to tell her I was on the way. When I dialed her house, my Aunt Diane answered the phone. My aunt had suffered brain damage several years prior and was subject to speak without restraint, so when I asked her to let me speak to my grandmother, she said, "Mama gone to the hospital. Dorothy died." She just spit it out like it was nothing. It was a brutal way to find out that my dear mother was gone. "Coming up here," she said. I dropped the phone and ran out of the door. I didn't know what to do. I sat in the middle of the driveway in a puddle of water. Young Buck was trying to get me off the ground. Trina was calling for the other people in the house to help me. She even called Shug to see if he could help. When she finally got him on the phone, he kept telling me, "It's all right, it's all right." He offered to fly out with me, but I chose to go alone. That 5-hour flight to Chicago seemed like it took the whole day. When I finally landed, I rushed down the stairs to the arrival area and into the car of my regular driver. We took the normal route, but traded our normal banter for a solemn drive. My friends were waiting for me when we pulled up. Through tears and nods, I made my way upstairs to my grandmother's home. When I opened the door, there was a sea of faces looking out at me, and at the center, my grandmother sat in her lazy boy, my mother's chair absent her usual smiling face. It was real. She was gone. I put my head in Grandmama's lap and cried until I fell asleep. Early the next morning, we woke up and prepared to go to the funeral home to make the arrangements. When we arrived, the funeral director took me back to view my mother's body. My insides felt as if they had dropped to the floor. It's impossible to explain the feeling. We had been so deeply connected. Now I was making plans to bury her. It was more than overwhelming. I was crushed, but there was so much to do. February 12th, 1995. When we arrived at the funeral home, there were cars lined up further than I could see. As I walked up the stairs, I recognized old classmates and teachers that I hadn't seen since my 8th grade graduation, people from the radio station, and many more people that I didn't know. People were coming in, one after another. I sat in disbelief as people walked up and offered their condolences. The service began with the reading of my mother's favorite scripture, John 3:16. After the scripture, there was a solo. Jewel walked down the aisle and up to the podium. I hadn't been sure that she would make it, so it was a pleasant surprise. Everyone's eyes were fixed on her because her breasts were damn near spilling out of her shirt. Nonetheless, I was happy to have her there. She was the only artist that showed up to support me. When it was time for me to sing, it was the most difficult performance of my life. I wasn't Danny Boy the artist. I was a child who had just lost his mother. When I walked past her casket, I almost fell out, but I had to pull it together. I felt a sense of responsibility to sing the way my mama had taught me. I sang the calm, meditative gospel standard, "When I See Jesus." Though I had sung it many times before, I could only make it to the second verse. I cried throughout the rest of the song. I buried my mother the next day. When I arrived at the funeral home, I was able to see my mama one final time. I just sat there looking at her body. It was painful, but I couldn't move. I sat there looking at my mama until the funeral directors came to cover her face up and close her casket. People had to hold me up as they lowered her body into the ground. I know it was God that brought me through. It had to be. If it weren't for God, I would have lost my mind. A week later, I decided to do what my grandmother had always told me to do. I went